Welcome to the Anatomy of Failure podcast, the podcast where we dissect what went wrong so you can get it right. I'm your host, Ivy Walker, and you're listening to episode 6, When Invention Meets Reality, navigating the line between concept and commerce. So what happens when partners differ in their understanding of the value of an idea? In today's conversation, we dive into a startup saga centered on a mailbox sensor that seemed poised for success until clashing perspectives on funding, roles, and equity led to a major breakdown. Our guest today, Kelly Berry, joined forces with the product's original inventor, only to find that the path to profitability can be riddled with communication pitfalls and unexpected legal hurdles. Ready to get started? Let's dive in. Kelly Berry, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me today.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Ivy.
So we found your story during doing some internet research, and it was an interesting twist or aspect of what some of the things that can go wrong when you're starting a business. But before we dive into any of that, can you just give us a little bit of your background? Tell us about, your entrepreneurial journey, your career prior to entrepreneurship. Give us a little sense of who you are.
Sure. Yeah, right out of college, I worked for a large insurance company and then moved from my husband's job, worked for another large business. And then I had kids and got my MBA and taught at the University of Wisconsin in Eau Claire for several years, really not having an entrepreneur mindset so much. But ultimately, a strong desire to have a lot more control and flexibility over my life, which I did not have with small children and a husband who was traveling over 50% of the time and no family nearby and a teaching job that was not super flexible. So I ended up starting my own consulting business while I was still teaching, really with a desire to have some control over my life, have some flexibility over my life. And certainly I know the journeys of most entrepreneurs, once you've started that path, it's really hard to go back to a job where you have to work exact hours and everything is the same. So I started the job to give me time with my kids, to ramp down in the summertime, to be flexible for their schedules, and discovered that I couldn't go back to working a real job, if you will, working for somebody after that. And I became really passionate about working with small businesses who were my clients and learning about them and their choices and the way that they ran their business. And that, I really became a passionate supporter of small businesses. And on top of that, my husband started his own business. And so I kind of lived through that journey as a spouse of somebody who was signing personal guarantees and trying to make decisions about when do you pay yourself and, how do you handle the good times when there might be bad times and all that juggling that goes along with it. So I have now become a huge and passionate supporter of small business owners, and the journey that they take is not an easy one. But once you've tried it, it's hard to ever go back.
Yeah, that is the truth, Kelly. I can testify to that. So let's talk about Answer Mailbox. What was the original idea behind Answer Mailbox?
Well, the actual product was a physical sensor that would go into a mailbox, like a post office box or a box that would be in a mailbox store, like a pack mail or a UPS store, that could then detect whether you have mail in your mailbox or not and send you an email or a text message. And so it came about because the original inventor of the sensor was the president of an association that rarely got mail. But when he got mail, he wanted to be able to pick it up. It could be a check or something. And so he was frustrated that he had to continually stop in and check to see whether there was mail in his mailbox or not. And as an engineer, he thought, I think I could find a solution to that problem. And so he invented this sensor and was able to get it working, but he didn't really have the background or the capabilities to launch it as a business. So that's kind of where it started, was just getting it to work from a technical standpoint.
And how did you get involved?
So I got involved because the inventor engineer hired me and my business partner to help him write a business plan for a business contest and to help him develop more of a marketing plan and some financial pro formas. My business partner is a CPA who, had put together financials like that before. And so as an engineer, he didn't really have a business background. So he brought us in as consultants to help him with that. And so we actually worked with him for several years as he grew his business, got the system going, and started to figure out how he was going to market it. And we became really, ardent supporters of what he was doing. It was a pretty cool technology. We could see the value in it, and we could see that it had some potential. So we were getting kind of excited as outsiders, just paid independent contractors to help him do the pieces that he didn't have in front of him. So it started that way. But then ultimately, we knew he needed more help to get going, and he didn't have money to pay us. So we said, well, hey, how about we put kind of a deal together where we become owners of the company with you, and then we all have a vested interest in it growing. So instead of getting us, having us get paid by the project or the hour or whatever the, pricing scheme was, we were kind of investing our own time to see this kind of launch of this particular service.
And so there were 3 of you in the business?
There actually were 4 of us. There was another engineer who was involved that had an ownership share as well, just not as big as the original inventor engineer. And then me and my business partner who had a consulting business together. So 4 of us.
And so the 4 of you, was anyone full-time during this process, or was everybody devoting time to it and then also working other jobs?
Yeah, it was kind of a side gig for everybody. But then my business partner and I kind of made the decision that we would slow down our consulting business to be able to have the bandwidth to help grow this, while the other 2 pretty much had full-time jobs and were doing this on the side.
And was everybody located in the same place?
Yes. Yeah, we were all in the same town.
Okay. And so when you and your business partner decided that you were going to focus on it, did you have any expectations about the other partners and additional time that they would be putting into the business?
Well, I was fortunate that my husband already owned his business, and he had 4 partners and had a partnership agreement. And so I knew that we needed to be a little bit more explicit about who's doing what and what this all looks like. The 2 engineers really were the ones that were inventing the technology, but didn't have the capability to grow it, to figure out how to handle manufacturing and distribution and sales and all these other components. So it made sense for my business partner and I, from the business side, to kind of just take this on. It became mostly a full-time venture for the 2 of us, while the engineers, could troubleshoot if there was a technology problem, but weren't so much as involved in the building of the business part of it.
So it sounds like there was sort of a 2-2 situation going on, right? So the engineer and his partner, and then you and your partner. How did that dynamic work?
Initially, it worked well because we could clearly see what everyone's skill sets were, right? The engineer who invented it really focused on the sensor technology and the hardware that was going into the mailboxes. The other engineer was more on the software side and getting the interface to, recognize there was mail in the mailbox and send a message. So all the software. And then, my end was more the marketing and growing the business. And my business partner was finance and operations because she'd worked in manufacturing before. So we each had our different skill sets, and they were complementary and not very overlapping. So it made sense that, each one of us kind of knew what our roles were and where we were headed. And so we were okay with what that looked like, from a starting point, until we weren't.
Right. Everything is good until then it isn't.
That's right.
I know what that feels like. So what were the challenges that you were facing? So as you're thinking about this is going along swimmingly, everybody is doing their part. What was the first big challenge you faced?
Well, the big challenge is money. That's what it all came down to, because in order to grow, we had to invest. And so it started out small, like we had sensors and we had a couple stores that were testing them and running them so we could get some data and see how it worked. And so the initial investment was like going to a trade show of, mailbox centers. So the investment is the, travel time and getting there and having all the, promotional products in our little booth. Because I still remember the first show we went to, our booth was literally just a folding table with a little cardboard mailbox that we could put a sensor in to show people. And then we were right next to FedEx that had like a flight simulator. We don't have that kind of budget. So we were just trying to, make small moves to get out in front of our customers and see if there was interest. And so initially, okay, we're all just going to plug in, a little bit of money. But then it got to the point where, okay, now we need more sensors, and they need to be, easier to ship and easy for someone who doesn't know anything about technology to install it and get it running. And so that was costing more money. And so initially we were all, okay, we've got this bill. We all put in a percentage of, we had agreed on our percentages, pay the bill, agree on our percentages, pay this bill, pay this bill. But then when it came to, some bigger expenses, it started to get more challenging. Like, are we all just paying it from our own pocket? Are we finding other forms of financing? We had a company credit card. What are we comfortable charging on the card? How are we paying it off? What other options are there for funding? Are we all willing to agree on, where we're going to find this funding? That was kind of where things started to break down a little bit.
So it's interesting. How were you having these conversations? In other words, were there planned meetings where the partners would sit down and you go through this agenda of all the things you need to do? Were they sort of ad hoc? How structured was this process?
I mean, we didn't have formally planned meetings, but the group of us met pretty regularly in person. Lots of emails as well in between meetings. We went to some of the trade shows together, and some of them, we took a road trip from Wisconsin down to Chicago for one of the trade shows. And so there's a lot going on that was in person, just kind of addressing things as they came up without having kind of a formal system for, how frequently we discuss things or what topics we need to be covering.
And when it came to the talk of how are you financing this? Is everybody just paying it separately? Are you raising capital? What ultimately did you do? Did you attempt to raise capital? Was it all just out of the partners' pockets?
So we had a connection with someone who was kind of an angel investor that met with small businesses. And so we had a meeting with the angel investor. We gave our pitch of, this is who we are. This is what we're doing. This is where we are right now. And at that point we had, I think 3 stores that, mailbox stores that were testing the system. So we had, customers who were using it. We were getting feedback from not only the store owner, but also the mailbox customers, how much they liked the service. And then we could show the angel investor, like, here's what the sensor looks like, and here's this interface that we have. And he said, I like where you're heading with this. I think that the sensor it's clear, the box that the hardware was in, and it needed to be clear for the technology to work. But he wanted could we round the corners and make it smaller and, do some things to make it easier to handle? Because, in our instructions, we're like, okay, you have to use a paper clip and unbend it to turn something on with a little tiny hole. He's like, no, can there be a switch? How can we make some modifications? Because I don't think that you're going to get acceptance from customers if it's too technical or too complicated to get it hooked up. And so he said, I can help you do that, but you're still in friends and family mode, is what he told us. You don't have paying customers. You have people that are interested in paying, but they're not yet, and you don't have any income. And I'm not willing to invest if you're not that far enough along. And I think that what you need is to invest, whether, I don't remember exactly how much it was, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 to redesign the case, and move from there, so that is not necessarily the hardware had to be redesigned, but what it went into, but that's, prototyping and plastics and all this stuff that needed some time and effort. So for me and my business partner, we thought, okay, this is a small hurdle that we need to invest this time to make the sensor look fancier and have a switch instead of using the, paper clip and all those things. And then we can maybe figure out how to ramp it up. So we were out looking at office space so we could all be in one location together, and we're going to quit our jobs, and this is going to be our full-time thing, and trying to figure out the infrastructure and how we were going to handle manufacturing and shipping. And I was putting together instructional videos on how to use it. But we hadn't quite gotten to the price point because we needed to get some quotes from, prototype plastics people. And when the numbers started coming out, the, inventor engineer, he didn't want to use his own money anymore. He'd been doing this admittedly for longer than we had, right? He'd been putting money into us for some time. And he wanted to get some kind of a loan that had outrageous interest rates because we had no income, and we just weren't comfortable doing that. And we're like, but we have the money and we're willing to spend the money. But we had different ownership amounts, and we said, if we're going to put in $20,000, then we feel like our interest in the ownership should increase as well. And that didn't go well.
So when you say you want your interest in the ownership should increase, was it a substantial increase? What was the shift? Would the engineer have been losing control? What was the thing that he had to wrap his mind around? Yeah,
because I think he owned the most of the four of us. So he was the majority share. So I think in this case, he maybe wouldn't have been the majority share any longer. I can't remember what the specific percentages were, but we were asking him to give up share. And the issue was that we felt like that investment, say it was $20,000, was a bigger percentage of the ownership of the whole business than he did, because in his mind, the business was worth millions of dollars because that's what we were projecting that it would be worth. And in our mind, it was worth what it was worth right now, which is we had credit card debt and no paying customers, and we had a good idea. So that became the real sticking point for the group of us, is that what is the value of the company? And if the two of us invest this money, how does it change what our ownership share is? And that was, that was the beginning of the end, or the middle of the end, or whatever, because there was just no agreement on what's this company currently worth. So you mentioned earlier a partnership agreement, that you had a partnership agreement put together. Did you think your partnership agreement was sufficient for covering the things that you were starting to see as you were operating? Initially, I did. The partnership agreement that we put together for the four of us was actually put together. It was put together by a big law firm, but it was we had won it in a contest. So it wasn't a law firm that I knew. I don't know who from the law firm. It was like a low-level person who put this, I'm sure it's a pretty basic agreement together. And it turned out that it was missing some components in terms of like how to value the company or what to do if there's a disagreement. Because ultimately, me and my business partner, we owned 50% of the business, and the other two guys owned 50%. So we were stuck because we disagreed, and we were, our votes were based on our ownership percentages, and there was just no moving forward. And that was an important lesson. Yeah, you don't think about what's in the contract quite often until there's a problem, right? Exactly. Right. And that is a lesson that I think a lot of us learn as entrepreneurs. We're so eager to get the deal done that we just want to, we'll just gloss over a lot of things, but contracts. We all liked each other. We were all excited. Let's go do this. Absolutely. Yeah. One of my investors said to me once, contracts are not made for the times when you like each other. They're made for the times when you hate each other. So you need to pay attention 100%. To what's in the contract. Yes. Have those difficult conversations up front. Because if you can't have those difficult conversations up front and get past them, you're never going to get past those issues when things go wrong. Right? So true. So now you're at an impasse. You're 50-50. The founding engineer doesn't want to give up any equity. What happens? Well, in addition to that impasse, that the engineer took a new job for his full-time job and moved halfway across the country. So we weren't meeting in person any longer, and we were still trying to move things forward and taking on a lot more of the role of that, because we were doing, sales and marketing and all this sort of thing that he wasn't involved in. And so I think that is a combination of factors. There was the distance, not seeing each other in person, him not being aware of what exactly we were doing because we weren't talking as often. And then him just being very sensitive to the fact that it was his idea, his invention, his business. And here he was losing equity in the business, which he thought was unfair. And we thought it was, necessary for us to make this investment to move it forward. So we were kind of at an impasse and just could not agree on what was going on. And it was starting to get nasty. Our communication was not friendly. We weren't enthusiastic anymore. It was either just straightforward, or, there was, that kind of implied, like, what did that mean? That kind of felt like it was, a dig, but wasn't, because, in an email, you can't sense tone, right?
Right.
And so if we're not having regular conversations, it just got harder. The communication got harder, and we just could not agree. We didn't want to take on a high interest loan when we knew we had the money to pay for it. We didn't want to keep all the equity exactly the same as it was when we were investing a significant amount of time and money in this, because we had essentially stopped doing our work as a consultant. And so not only do we have the actual money we were putting in, but we had that sweat equity of our time putting that in too, and felt like that needs to be worth something. It's one thing to invent the idea, it's another thing to actually be able to successfully sell it in the market. So we just couldn't agree on those at all. And it just got to the point where he was going behind our back and talking to customers and saying we weren't part of the business anymore, and bad things were happening. And I ended up consulting an attorney who put a cease and desist letter together, and it got really bad and messy. So it was not fun.
And so ultimately, how did it resolve?
Well, ultimately, we couldn't move forward without making changes. We couldn't find any investors. We weren't willing to take the loan on. He wasn't willing to take our money. So we had to just shut down the business. So I was responsible then for reaching out to all the stores who already had our product and were testing it for us, and telling them we weren't going to do this, that we had to figure out how to get them to remove all the sensors and mail them back to us, turn off the system, and then figure out how to handle dissolving the company. So again, we had to kind of negotiate all of that. And ultimately, what do we have? What were our assets in this company? We had the intellectual property for the sensor, and we had the software that we had worked with an outside vendor to develop the interface platform for the stores and the customers to use. You need both of those for the system to work, right? So we divided up the intellectual property, and I got the software and he got the hardware. So neither one of us can start the business without the other piece. So those were our assets. I don't know how you value those, but that's what we decided is how we would split that up. And then our other assets, if you will, are that we had gone to these trade shows and we had made these little tape measures that had the company name and logo and a toll-free number on it that we were giving out at trade shows. And I probably had a box of 300 of them. So I'm like, that's our assets. So I'm like, we can just divide up all the mailbox, tape measures by our ownership percentages, and you get, your 40% of the tape measures. I don't know if I ended up shipping any out to him or he didn't want them or anything, but I was giving away tape measures to family members for quite some time. And then we had debt too. We had credit card debt that we, and I guess to everyone's kind of, we were all responsible people. So we all paid our share of the debt to pay off that credit card and then just dissolve the company.
And everyone took care of their portion?
Yes, everyone did. Yeah.
That's actually a pretty amazing result.
Yeah, considering how bad it had gotten, it was.
Mm-hmm. So what did you learn, Kelly, about partnerships, entrepreneurship? Mm-hmm. What did you learn?
Well, 50-50 isn't always a good idea if your voting is based on ownership, because, you get stuck. There's a standstill. So that, that's an important lesson that I share with other businesses I work with, because people are like, oh, we own this 50-50. I'm like, how's that going to work for you? What if you disagree? How do you handle votes? And then the other piece of that obviously then goes back to that operating agreement. You need to have a solid operating agreement that comes up with all the scenarios, all the bad things that could happen that you agree on while you like each other, just like you said. So in case something goes wrong. And we thought we had we did have an operating agreement, but it didn't even have instructions on how to dissolve the company in the operating agreement. And so we were trying to follow that, and then we're like, it's just not there. So we have to kind of navigate it ourselves.
And so when you were going through the process of dissolution, do you feel that the temperature went down between you and the other partners? Did things calm down during that time, or did it spike up again until you were done with the resolution fully?
I think we just did our best to not speak to each other and just be very, share whatever was necessary and leave it at that. It was a really hard time emotionally because I think we all had a lot vested in the idea of this working. We were really excited about it. We could see the potential. And I think everyone was upset that it was ending. And I'm sure that the engineers blamed us and we weren't happy with them and nobody was happy. And it was a tough time for sure. I know my business partner and I, we went back to doing our consulting work, but you lose a lot of momentum when you just stop working for a year or so, not to mention income. And so it was really hard to get going. And I know I have a shirt, like an Answer Mailbox shirt that I wore with the logo on it to the trade shows. And I'm like, I can't even look at it. I can't even look at the color orange right now because that was the color of the logo, and just anything was very sensitive. It was very upsetting. It was really a really hard time because we really could see the potential and feel like we were getting closer and closer, and then just boom, it was just fell apart. And
that's actually the next thing I wanted to go to. What was the impact on you personally? So you had all of this going on, you had all this vested interest. Aside from the money, you had spent this time and you had this excitement. As this was unraveling, how did you process this?
Not well. It was very hard. It was very upsetting. I was, fortunate. Obviously, my husband had a full-time job, and so it wasn't like the income. I was able to kind of take that risk in not having my consulting business going while we tried to get this up and running. And then I had to kind of just rebuild the consulting business. I just tried to let it go, but obviously I wasn't fully letting it go if I couldn't even speak about it for years. It was a challenging time. I would say I definitely learned a lot about running a business, because just being a consultant on my own isn't the same as, having business partners or trying to get out there with marketing and going to all the trade shows and all the things you have to do and figuring out manufacturing and working with the prototypes of the plastic. There's a lot involved that gave me a good education on, all the ins and outs of the different aspects of running a business. So I guess that's a good thing.
If you were advising someone who was partnering with a tech founder, right? So you've got the business and then you've got the tech founder. You're advising someone who was partnering in that kind of situation. What are the key points you would relay to them given your experience?
Yeah, I think there's a certain sensitivity that an inventor has to their product, a sense of ownership. It's their baby. They're not maybe as ready to give up any piece of that, or to recognize the difference between an idea, a working prototype, and a successful business. Because a successful business isn't just the sensor, right? It's the infrastructure that goes all around it. And I'm not sure that the engineer saw that all of that as a necessity to the product being successful. He was more focused on, does this thing work? So some of the things I think I've learned that I've passed along to folks is, someone had told me that there's this concept called mad scientist, that anyone who's invented something is so emotionally connected to it that it's really hard for them to let go of it, and that you need to be aware of that and cautious about that. So that's one piece of it. And then the other piece of it is that, better communication about what the business is versus what the product is. There are a lot of other components, like me putting all these training videos together and going to the trade shows and putting the marketing and promotions plan together and trying to figure out who is providing customer service and who is, tech support and all those things. And none of that was part of the actual, I invented a thing. So there's a lot involved.
Yeah, that's really good feedback. It's really good advice. There is the product, and then there is the business. And a lot of times entrepreneurs in general, whether they're tech founders or not, we tend to think that a good idea is worth something. And it's really not just the idea. There's so much with the execution. And it's great that you had a nice idea. Awesome. But that's a long way from a successful business.
Right. And no one pays for good ideas.
Nobody pays for good ideas. Yeah. Did the company have the four of you as a founding team? Did you have any outside advisors working with you during this time?
Occasionally we spoke to some people, and I think, again, the engineer didn't like any of the advice he was getting because it was all the same. Like, this needs to be more user friendly. You need to have paid customers, that type of thing. But we didn't really work with any consultants or advisors necessarily. I mean, we kind of were that role initially and then stepped into the business. So another lesson for me: don't get too attached to your clients' ideas.
Do you think an advisory board might have been helpful as you were reaching these different points of challenges?
Well, it's funny you should say that, because first of all, my husband always made sure he had an advisory board of people that were not, related or connected to their business in any way, to provide kind of that unbiased look. And we didn't have that, but we were, kind of busy doing things and weren't thinking about that. But also my current role, what I'm really spending time doing is running business owner roundtable groups. And so getting small business owners to meet monthly and talk about their problems, issues, opportunities, concerns. And really that's what it is. It's a room full of people who are unbiased, not connected to your business, not afraid to say what they think, to kind of push you. And perhaps if I had been in a group like that, someone else might have brought up some of these warning signs before I ran into them myself. And that's one of the reasons why I'm really a passionate supporter of business owner roundtable groups, because I think that that's a great place to bring these ideas, hear from other people's perspectives when it's like a fun new thing in your head and you're excited about it, but other people can kind of like ask the hard questions that maybe you are not asking yourself.
So accountability group in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, those are significantly important. And a lot of business owners, unfortunately, haven't recognized the value of that yet. Can you give us a sense of how you're helping businesses and how somebody might be able to take advantage of the services that you offer?
Yeah, so I think over time, not just from this experience, but just my own experience working for, nearly 20 years with small business owners, every time I speak to small business owners, I hear their issues, their concerns, what's keeping them up at night. And I started thinking, you all have the same problems. You all have the same concerns. And you all think that it's you, that something is wrong with me. I'm the problem. I don't know what I'm doing. I have imposter syndrome, whatever it might be. And I'm like, if I could just get you all in the room, you could see that you're not alone, that this is a common struggle, and you could help each other because everyone approaches things slightly differently. Mm-hmm. And so I started doing some research into, what are ways to help small businesses grow? And found peer groups as an option, and then chose to get myself, trained and licensed to be a peer group facilitator. And now I've found that is something that really lights me up. I don't have to be an expert at anything other than, facilitating and organizing. I just, get them in the room so they can have the conversation, and then I can bring whatever resources I think they might need to support the conversations that we're having, whether that's, bringing in a commercial banker to talk about lines of credit, or when to ask for a loan versus a line of credit, or, bringing in, different, leadership development or whatever it might be. But the idea is that we shouldn't all feel like we're alone in this process. People have gone through it before. So whether you have a coach or a mentor or a peer group, reach out for help. That's what, my key advice to people. And had we involved other outside people in this experience, it might have gone very differently. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'd be the COO of a, giant technology company that had mailbox technology all over the place, and we'd have new product lines. And who knows what could have happened. So it's kind of become my mission to run these peer groups and online accountability groups, just to help business owners not feel alone, to remind them that they can help each other by, sometimes you're the one that needs the help. Sometimes you can give the help, that it all comes down to that sense of community and supporting one another. And that's really where I'm trying to make my mark these days.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Kelly. That is a much needed service. And you are located where in Wisconsin?
I'm in the Eau Claire area, so not too far from the Twin Cities. And so I run a group here, and then I'm working on putting together a group that is actually rural business owners who maybe can't easily meet with people in their own community because the community and the businesses are so dependent on one another. So I'm putting virtual groups together of business owners in rural communities, and that's kind of in the works right now.
Sounds great. Well, thank you for joining me today for this discussion. Do you have any last thoughts you'd like to share?
Just reach out for help. Just like we talked about with my experience going through this Answer Mailbox, as well as what I've learned over time is we shouldn't all try to be doing this on our own. So
let's not all reinvent the wheel every single time.
Exactly.
Every single time.
Yes.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Well, thanks so much for your time today, Kelly.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
I appreciate talking to you and learning from you.
Well, I enjoyed being here, and thanks for finding me and giving me the opportunity.
Sounds great. Well, there you have it. Kelly Berry's candid account of what it really takes to transform an idea into a thriving business. From a groundbreaking mailbox sensor to legal standoffs and dissolving partnerships, Kelly's story is both cautionary and inspiring. Her experiences underline just how crucial it is to align on finances, ownership, and overall vision before you ever reach the breaking point. Thanks so much for joining me. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with your network, leave us a rating or review, and help spread the word about the Anatomy of Failure podcast. You can also check out my website at anatomyoffailurepodcast.com, where you'll find resources to help you implement what you learn in these podcast episodes. Until next time, I'm Ivy Walker, and this has been another Real Talk on the entrepreneurial journey. Stay inspired, and I'll catch you next time.